Hi guys, Willie Morris here, and today I just thought we'd take a look at my new trailer scoring template. So I did make a similar video a few years back, but obviously things have kind of changed since then. I've really sort of simplified the template and just made it a lot more workflow friendly, and also a lot of the libraries that I'm using have changed as well. So let's dive right in. I'm just going to start from the top here. Cubase allows you just to have this little utility area at the top separated from everything else. So in mine I just have a simple seconds readout just to see where I am in the track, as well as my bar and beat markers. I have a structure track, which I use mostly to mark the in and out points so that when I do an export, I know that it's going to be exactly the same each time. This also helps with stemming, and also helps if I have to do a custom version of the track and I want to come back to it, but I want to send them the exact same length as they would have been used to. And I can also use this just to mark, sort of structure points in the track. So intro, build section, back end, that kind of thing. I also have a video track. This is just because sometimes near the end when I'm writing, I'll pop in a trailer and just kind of see how it works against picture. I have a bunch of trailer stuff where I've just taken the music from it. So then with my own stuff, I can just see how it sits against, trailer type effects and dialogue. All right, so that's the boring utility section out of the way. So now everything I do is grouped into instrument types, as you can see. So percussion at the top, everything's color coded, everything goes in its own folder. And for percussion, I have all the sort of traditional drum type things separated into these three categories. So under lows, I have lots of low booms, hits, kick type sounds. Mids is kind of your driving percussion stuff. So I've got toms, taikos, juns, that kind of thing. And then this high section has my kind of attacky sort of layers in it. So I've got some noise snares, really high toms, rototom type stuff. So these three categories all are grouped to percussion low. So they all sit in the same group. It's just handy for me to have them separated out this way. And it helps when I'm writing drums as well, because I kind of want to write my arrangements thinking of those three levels really. So I only want to really use the proper kind of low big hits for, first beat accents. The mid stuff tends to be the kind of main rhythm driving kind of stuff. And highs, you can do really fast rhythms or accent certain things as well. My next group along will be the high percussion. So I like to separate this out as a stem for editors, just so it's got things like cymbals, stick, ticky kind of sounds on, and like clock tick sort of stuff. So that's my percussion. Next I have an effects section. These, again, all of these are separate groups or separate stems. And you'll see why at the end when I talk about how I export stuff. None of these actually have any instruments loaded apart. I think that one from Damage has junk kits on it. But everything else is just plain. It's just a blank contact patch. And this is just because I use different hits and risers and sound design for every track. So the first group is my main hits. These are kind of like big whoosh bang type sounds. And then I separate out the risers. And sound design's a bit miscellaneous. It's just kind of anything that's doesn't fit in other categories and is more sort of, a sound design based type sound that doesn't fit naturally. So that's all my effects stuff. I have a bunch of pianos. Obviously I just tend to pick one for a project or maybe a couple. So at the top I've just got a couple of different grands and uprights, which are sort of more regular piano stuff. And then near the bottom I've got plucked and harmonic piano things as well. So next category would be bass, which I like to keep separate. Again, it's just a thing stems for editors. They quite like to have control of all your low end stuff. So this first one actually is an input from my Kemper amp, and then the other three are just sort of sub bass patches from a few libraries. These tend to change with every project. I've just got these here as starters really. So that's bass. Let's take a look at synths. So for all my synth stuff, I just separated into long articulations and then shorts. So shorts is going to be things like arpeggios and ostinato pattern stuff. A lot of the time these end up being like a double for the short strings. And as you'll see when we get on strings, I have them divided the same way. So again, these are just left blank. They're contact ones. They're routed to the correct groupings and such. So it's just a kind of easier thing for me to get started, but they don't actually have any sounds loaded. This one here is for my little analog synth. And there's only one loaded, obviously you can only use one at a time for the outboard stuff. So next I have some guitars. These first two are just kind of big power chord patches. That one's from Orchestral Tools and that one's a Keep Forest Atlantica one. And this one's another one that links to my Kemper. A lot of the guitar stuff I end up playing on trailer stuff tends to be more sound designy, so it might actually get shifted up into the sound design category. But again, these are just quick starters if I feel like putting a power chord in somewhere. Strings is a slightly bigger category. I used to have a pretty massive template for strings, but I've sort of pared it down now, just to my most used things. And like the synths, this strings one is set up the same way, so I have long articulations and then short articulations. These are loaded up with sounds, as you can see. I've got some Metropolis arc patches, just doing sustain, legato, marcato stuff. And then for shorts, again, a bit of Metropolis arc. I've got some Lass, which I like to layer with it. It's a really nice dry library. This one's actually the Saucony Quartet from Spitfire, so it is a quartet library, but I like using solo libraries as sort of first chair patches, you know, so it just adds a lot of definition, I find, because a lot of the sort of big string and brass patches sound huge, but you don't get that sort of definition. It comes a bit synthy sometimes. Again, these are all just starters, you know, almost for sketching, so I can just get a track going quickly. I'll obviously end up using probably a lot more than is here, and even sort of completely different stuff sometimes. A final category I have is the brass. Again, it's divided into two, into longs and shorts. And I love the brass from Metropolis Arc, so I'm pretty much just using that. But it gets layered with a lot of other stuff as well in the end. Okay, so that actually covers a lot of the tracks. One thing I would mention for these that I also have set up is that I tend to try and do a rough gain stage on everything. So if I just load up a patch, you'll see what I mean. So this bass drum here is from LA Modern Percussion. And what I'll do is set all the faders at 0 and then play the patch in and basically just keep turning it down in contact until it comes up to about -12 dB on the channel here. I like to sort of roughly gain stage a template like this because basically with trailer stuff I know I'm going to end up with quite a huge amount of tracks, and if I keep them all at their default volumes, what will happen is by the end of the project there'll be so many tracks and so many things kind of pushing the level up that everything just ends up clipping all the time. So I know that this way, at least when I've got a bunch of stuff in the project, hopefully it's going to be kind of hitting maybe around sort of -3 on my master bus. The other thing I love to set up in the template is the track delay. And this is basically because in sample libraries, they will cut a sample at the beginning in completely different ways for different libraries. So you'll find that some have quite a big delay before the actual attacky transient part of the sound. So some libraries will cut this attack down and make it really short so that it starts exactly on the transient. And this makes it feel really sort of responsive, but it's not as natural. If you can think of maybe playing a piano where some sample libraries will cut the sample as you hear the note, but other libraries might cut it so that you hear the finger being pressed onto the piano key, then the hammer hitting the string, and then the note. So obviously these timing differences are kind of small, but in some libraries they are quite big, and they're also all different. So if you have a big template, especially in trailer stuff, you tend to have a lot of instruments that aren't anywhere near in time with each other, even if you exactly quantize them to the beat. Now this is quite a big subject on its own, so I don't want to get too bogged down in it. I might do a separate video on it if anyone actually wants to learn about any of this stuff. But basically for my template, I just like to make sure that everything, if it's programmed exactly on the beat, then the transient is going to hit on the beat. So I have to start adding in these delay times to it. So this one's just -12 milliseconds. Percussion tends to be cut quite tight. You'll see with other stuff, sometimes this is quite big, you know, up to maybe 150, 200 milliseconds off. It just depends on the library and how they've cut it. Okay, so hopefully that explains what the tracks are doing. So let's take a look at some of the effects channels now. And basically these are just some simple go-to effects, mainly reverbs. I've had a little 1/8 note delay in there, and this is my effects pedal chain at the bottom. I like to run a lot of stuff through guitar pedal effects, so this is just a little outboard chain I have set up, and it makes it nice and quick just to process those sounds. So running through the effects, I have a score stage verb, which is basically just kind of adding a bit of a stage sound to really dry stuff. Just gives it a bit of kind of room tone, really. Next I have a verb set up for the percussion. These are all spaces, really. Most of these reverbs are quantum leap spaces stuff. So this whole verb 1 is just a orchestral percussion preset. Another thing I like to do, which is kind of a little tip, is to set the pre-delay in time with the track. There is a handy calculator that you can use to do this online, which I'll link in the description. But basically it just means that when you hear that kind of slap coming back from the reverb, that it's in time with the track. And this just kind of helps keep your reverbs quite clean. Most of the effects reverbs are also EQ'd, so I just have a low and high shelf just to take off some of that slightly nasty real top end, and then roll off some of the mud and sub at the bottom. All right, so next is just another Hall verb, and this is just set for the short articulations. So it just has a smaller decay time, just helps to keep the short notes sort of pretty punchy. Then I have the same thing again, but for longs, just has a longer decay time. That's a little 8th note delay set up. I think that's with, yeah, repeater from the Slate bundle. Then I have a kind of really long effects type verb, which is from R2. And that's on a like 6-second tail. So that's for sort of ambient stuff. Sometimes I use black hole instead of that as well. And that's just my effects pedal, send and return there. All right, so one other thing I have set up is everything in the mixer panel. And the first thing I like to do is set up these channel presets so I can jump between what I'm looking at. So I have all my inputs on 1. On 2, I have all my tracks. Obviously at the minute you can only see this bass drum one because it's the only one I've got that's not disabled. But normally this would be full of all the tracks that I'm running. Number 3 is stems. So these are all the group tracks I have set up. And essentially this is what gets exported at the end. Trailer's pretty much always submitted as stems. So this just means that I've got everything ready to go when I need it. And then the last one just shows all my effects channel stuff in one place. I also like to put a little limiter on the master channel just to guard your speakers really. It doesn't actually do anything, it's just guarding the output. I also use Sonarworks, which for those of you who haven't seen it before is just a speaker calibration software. So it just basically you take a recording of your room and then the software corrects the EQ curve for you. So you can see my room's got a fairly horrific spike in the low mids here and a few other drops in the highs and high mid. And I have 2 presets, just one set up for my monitors and one for the headphones I use. It's nice in Cubase because normally this plugin would sit on the end of your master bus and you'd have to disable it when you do an export to make sure that you're not printing your audio with that. With the calibration on. But in Cubase I have it set up on the control room, so all it is just monitored through. It never prints it in as it would if it was in this list here. Okay, so I think that's pretty much everything in the mixer. We've gone through all the effects channels and everything that's happening on the instrument channels. This is how they get loaded in whenever I start a track, with everything disabled basically, so I can just click and enable a track as I go. Just saves on RAM and CPU, especially as I'm using 1 instance of contact per track, which isn't the most efficient way of doing things, but it does allow me to use instrument tracks as opposed to a straight up MIDI track. And that means I can use all my regular audio inserts and sends and everything else. Okay, so when a track is finished or ready to send off for a draft or something like that, I'll just show you what I do for an export. If this is a work in progress, I'll just do an export of the master bus, so that's dead simple. But when it comes to finally stemming everything out, I'll go to multiple, and then you can see here, these are all my group tracks that we've talked about before. So what I can do is simply just select all of them, and then I would choose if I want to have all the inserts included, all the sends, etc. I tend to go for this one, so it's just everything, because I might have something small on the master bus that gives it like a little different tone or flavor. And once I've selected all my stems, you'll notice I've also got a few hidden ones as well, because a few projects I tend to have, vocals or winds in, but they're not very often, so I tend to have them hidden. But just for example, if I select all these stems for export, I can add them to the queue, and then as soon as I hit start, everything's just going to get exported in one go, so I don't have to sit there and go through every stem. So yeah, that's my template and a bit of my process of doing a track. I find the more work I do, the better it is to keep everything as organized as possible, especially now as I'm getting asked for more and more customs on existing tracks. I'll have to dive back into old projects, and having everything set up in the same way and with a quick way to export has been really handy. It's a massive time saver because a lot of those deadlines are pretty insane. So yeah, I hope this helps you out. If there's anything you want to ask in more detail, just ask me in the comments. But if not, I'll see you again on the next one.